Hey guys, Jake from 8020 Media here. Today we're talking about throttle bodies. In this video, we're going to talk about symptoms of and how to diagnose issues with a bad throttle body. Air enters your engine starting through the air filter, the air box, and the intake piping. However, the throttle body is what controls how much of that air actually gets sent into the engine. The amount of air being sent into the engine depends on how far down you're pressing the accelerator pedal. The more you press down the gas pedal, the more air we then need to lead into the engine. And so that's what the throttle body's whole job is. It is a circular pipe and it has a butterfly valve in it that opens and closes. The throttle body sits right in between the intake manifold and the air intake and air intake piping. Throttle bodies actually used to be connected to the gas pedal on older carbureted vehicles, to where as you press down the gas pedal, it had a direct wire to the throttle body that opened the throttle body more. But of course, in today's day and age on modern vehicles, everything is controlled electronically, and that's done through an electronic throttle controller. The electronic throttle controller usually sits on the side of the throttle body, and what that does is takes a reading from the accelerator pedal position sensor, which reads how far down the gas pedal is being pressed. That goes to your engine's ECU, and the ECU then sends a signal to the throttle body controller to tell it how far open it should be relative to how far your foot's pressed down on the gas pedal. And then there's a sensor that sits on that that's called the throttle position sensor, and that sends a reading back to the ECU telling what position the throttle body's at. And that's important, one, to make sure that it's open or closed as much as it should be, but also two, to then be used to control how much fuel is being sent into the engine in order to optimize the air to fuel ratios. So when we look at that, there are a number of course, electronic components that can fail, that can cause issues with your throttle body, but you can actually have an issue with the throttle body butterfly valve itself. So with that being said, now that we understand how a throttle body works and what electronic components are associated with the throttle body, we can then break down throttle body issues into three different categories or primary causes. The first one is going to be the throttle body actuator or the throttle body control motor that's responsible for actually opening up that butterfly valve. The second is going to be that butterfly valve itself. And then the third thing is going to be an electronic issue with the throttle position sensor, and subsequently it could be an issue with your accelerator pedal position sensor, which I did just recently do a video on the accelerator pedal position sensor. So if you think that might be your problem, go ahead and check out that video to see how you can diagnose problems with that. So with everything happening electronically, a lot of times throttle body issues are going to be with the control motor that opens the butterfly valve or with the throttle position sensor, but the butterfly valves themselves can actually get gunked up, and that can cause them to not open as easily, which can then put more stress on the motor, but ultimately cause them to not open or close to the degree that they're supposed to, which is of course going to cause issues with the air getting into your engine and therefore throwing off your air to fuel ratios. So let's go ahead and talk about the throttle body and why or how those can get gunked up and then start sticking and not opening and closing properly. A lot of this you can thank to emissions technology. There is a technology known as EGR, which is exhaust gas recirculation. And what that does is take a portion of your exhaust gases and it reroutes them all the way back to your intake piping. And so we're taking dirty exhaust gas air that has a lot of particulates, it has oil, fuel, and all of these leftover contaminants in it, and we're taking that and sending that back into the air intake. It therefore then passes through the throttle body. So we're taking dirty, oily, fuely air and sending it past the throttle body. It's natural that some of that oil and those other deposits and particles get stuck on the throttle body, and ultimately that's what can cause them to get gunked up and not open properly. With that being said, let's go ahead and talk about how to diagnose issues with the throttle body and how to determine whether the issue is with the butterfly valve, the motor, or the throttle position sensor. Step one, as always, is to check for check engine lights. Now, regardless of what the issue is here, you're going to get some form of check engine light for the throttle position sensor, and that's that's because even if it's just a gunked up throttle body butterfly valve, then it's not going to be opening or closing as much as it's supposed to be, and so the reading that the throttle position sensor sends back to the ECU is not going to align with what it should be, which is going to cause you to get a check engine light probably for your throttle position sensor, but you'll also probably get a check engine light for your air to fuel ratios because your car's not going to be sending enough air into the engine relative to the amount of fuel that it's getting. So a check engine light will always point you to the throttle body or the throttle position sensor, but it's important to check it because it could also point you to the accelerator pedal position sensor. And so having a bad sensor there can cause erratic movements coming from the throttle body. So now let's go ahead and talk about diagnosing specifically with throttle body issues, which is the problem. So step one here, what I generally like to do is to pull the throttle position sensor off and go ahead and blast that with compressed air or some type of sensor cleaner. Because it sits open in the engine bay on the throttle body where we have a lot of dirty gases coming through, it's possible for the sensor itself to go ahead and get gunked up and clogged up, and that can cause it to function improperly. Now, step two, if you have a high quality code reader, which I absolutely recommend everyone gets, and when I say high quality, I'm not talking about a $20 one. You're gonna have to get a more expensive one that's probably a little bit closer to $100. But what that's gonna do is give you a lot of other advanced diagnostic capabilities that you don't get with your cheaper code readers. And this is important because you can actually read the throttle position sensor and read the signal that's coming from it as you sit in the car and press the gas pedal down. This will help you diagnose if the issue is the throttle position sensor or not. If you're pressing down on the gas pedal and the reading from the throttle position sensor isn't changing, or it's fluctuating way too much, or it just doesn't look accurate, then you can assume that you have an issue with your throttle position sensor. And if you don't have a really good code reader like that, I recommend buying one. You're gonna need it at some point, and the capabilities that they have make it completely worth it if you're someone that likes to fix things on your own. But if you don't have a good code reader that can do this, what I'm gonna recommend from there is the free option, which is gonna be pulling off all of your intake piping so that you can actually visually see your throttle body and the butterfly valve itself. Once you have access to that, you should be able to see if the butterfly valve is dirty. And if it is dirty, it's good to go ahead and pull the whole throttle body off. You can completely clean the butterfly valve. You can clean the connections for the actuator motor and the throttle position sensor and put everything back to see if all you needed was some cleaning to clean up the connections or clean up any gunk on the butterfly valve. If you clean the throttle body, you should be able to feel with your hand whether it's opening properly or not, whether there's a little too much or not enough resistance, and that can give you an idea whether it's too gunked up to be able to open like it should be. But if we've gone ahead and checked the sensor, we know the sensor isn't bad, we've cleaned the throttle body butterfly valve, and we know the butterfly valve isn't bad, then what it comes down to is the actuator motor and whether the actuator motor is actually opening up the throttle body as it's supposed to. Now, this could also cause your TPS readings to be off with a code reader, because if the motor's bad, it's not going to be opening the butterfly valve like it should be. You could tell this by running your vehicle with just the throttle body on there and not an air intake, but generally that's not the smartest of moves, because then you're going to be letting a ton of dirty air and debris potentially into your engine since you don't have an air filter on it. So ultimately, guys, the best way to diagnose it is to have a good code reader and to be able to see whether the issue is going to be electronic with the actuator motor or the TPS sensor. And it's good to pull the intake piping off to visually inspect the throttle body to see if it needs to be cleaned, and pull it off, clean it, clean all the connections, and then take it from there. Last but not least, it is common to get a different check engine light for the throttle position sensor as well as the throttle body actuator motor. Another reason why having a code reader, and more specifically a good code reader, is helpful, because you should be able to tell just from a basic reading of codes what the problem comes down to. So ultimately, read codes, and if you need to, pull the piping off to go ahead and see whether the throttle body itself is dirty. That wraps it up for our video here. If you guys appreciate this content, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for all of our future content.